Out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan and Pauline to talk a little bit of reaction to South Carolina's 44-20 win over Texas A&M number 10 Texas A&M on Saturday night. Also might hit a little bit of basketball, which both tipped off for women's basketball and men's basketball last night. Alan somehow was in Vegas yesterday and is back here joining us today.
Shane Beamer had some interesting comments about my presence today in the presser. If you guys want to go back and watch that, I won't spoil it for you, but he had thoughts about me being there.
What, positive or negative thoughts?
Well, mostly positive, but he did say I look like crap. That's an actual quote. So
hey, there you go. Anyway, before we get too much into the game, I did want to mention two quick recruiting notes. The big thing, if you are a subscriber on GamecockScoop.com, we had a ton of quotes from pretty much everyone that attended the game this past weekend. Several official visitors, including Donovan Murph, who is the biggest target left in the 2025 class for South Carolina. Kelton Mickle, who is the number one rated JUCO player by Rivals, was also there. Feeling kind of goodish about that. I think we'll probably hear a decision one way or another on him this week too. But anyway, we've already heard two decisions since then. Today we had 2025 edge player Josh Smith. I say edge player because he's played a little outside linebacker. He's played some defensive end. He's about 6'2", 220. So if he's going to be a defensive end every down, probably needs to get a little bit bigger. But could see him kind of having a role either way. And then yesterday we had 2026 athlete, though I think he's going to play DB, Peyton Dyer out of Georgia. So that's two commitments already from this past weekend, and it won't surprise me at all if a couple more come rolling in. So keep an eye on GamecockScoop.com for that. All right, let's talk about the game itself. So the 44-20 win is Shane Beamer's 7th straight night SEC home win. That's a lot of qualifiers, I think, but still, I think that's maybe where we start is the environment that was created on Saturday night. I mean, I watched it on TV. You guys were both there. Seemed like one of the better environments that we've seen in a long, long time. Maybe back to 2022 Tennessee was the last one that came to mind for me there. I saw on some social media like Reddit and stuff that when O'Donnell Fortune had that pick six, which of course got wiped off the board, that it was one of the loudest moments that pretty much anyone had experienced in that stadium. And yeah, it seems like night games in Williams-Brice, and I know a lot of national correspondents have said this week too, is one of the most like dangerous environments to go to in the SEC at this point. I've heard some comparisons to LSU from national correspondents this week, which is maybe a little bit too high of praise, but I mean it's definitely gotten really, really cool. Pauline, you're down on the field. I'll start with you and then go to Alan.
Yeah, so homecoming weekend, I guess it was because we haven't been in Williams-Brice for a while, but it was a reality check again. My ears were ringing, and the poor Aggie's dog, I don't know how she was okay with how loud the noise was. It was insane. And I have to say kudos to the student section for staying the entire game, even at the halftime when Texas A&M pulled out the stops and was able to tie the game up 2020, because I feel like any other game, half of them would have left and they would have missed the best part of the entire game, which was storming the field. For me personally, was not the best part of the game because of the fact.
Did you get run over? I was wondering about that.
Oh goodness, thank goodness, no. I actually went into the student section while everyone was going out to the field.
That was smart, yeah.
Yeah. But the poor groundskeeper, man. The bushes are destroyed. The field is destroyed.
The camera angles were pretty great. Definitely saw a couple people get eaten by the bushes as they tried to come over the wall.
And you know, too, last time that happened, it was Tennessee in 22. It's the last home game of the year. You have 8 months to fix it. It doesn't matter. There's a game there in 12 days now? 11 days? I'm curious to stand in those hedges when Missouri comes to town a week from Saturday.
Well, I don't think they grow them from a seed, so they'll figure it out. But Alan, what about you? So you were up in the press box on Saturday night. Said that the place was jumping and shaking a little bit there in the first half, and then we'll kind of get into the actual what took place on the field. But what do you think of the environment and the claim that perhaps it's one of the best in the SEC?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of knew something was coming. That was probably, I think I tweeted it, but other than Clemson last year, which is always just because it's Clemson, that was probably the loudest I'd heard it pregame. Gamecock Walk was probably the fullest I've seen it. It was loud. People are into it. I think there is something to be said too for when you only have, I guess technically they had 2 home night games, and one of them was Akron. 1 home night SEC game in a season, you circle it even more than you normally do. I think people have this one circled because, the times come out in the summer now, or the windows. People had it circled pretty much all fall that A&M was going to be the night game opportunity. They delivered, and I thought, honestly, it impacted the game. I thought one team looked comfortable and A&M didn't. They said we transitioned talking about a little bit of football, but you start a freshman quarterback in that environment on the road. Your safety net running back gets injured first drive of the game for A&M, and it took them a little bit of time to find some footing on offense in that environment.
Yeah, South Carolina obviously got out to a pretty quick start, which they've done pretty well throughout the season. Got off to a 14-0 lead, and kind of felt like things were going pretty well. And then a little bit of shadows of LSU, where you have a positive play. Raheem Sanders catches like a 20-yard pass, fumbles it away. And it sort of felt like from there, A&M seized a little bit of the momentum back, quieted the crowd down a little bit. And if you're a South Carolina fan at that point, I think you're probably starting to think, oh no, here we go again. Shades of LSU and Alabama, where you get that early lead and then just make some mistakes down the stretch that let it slip away. Obviously, that is not what ultimately ended up happening. South Carolina ends up scoring 27 straight points after Texas A&M took a brief 20-17 lead, and really kind of dominated the game in the second half. You mentioned the redshirt freshman quarterback in Marcel Reed. I thought he played really well. I think he's going to be really good.
Yeah.
And didn't really seem too rattled by the environment until pretty late in the game when they were trying to play catch up. And at that point, the pass rush was starting to get there and all that sort of stuff. But
I think that's a great quality.
Yeah, go ahead, Pauline.
I was just going to say, I think that's a great quality in a freshman quarterback, especially because of the fact that they're so fresh to this new college football environment. And Williams-Brice is quite an intimidating field to play on. So that was just my little insight on that.
Well, no, I think he's going to be very, very good for a long time. But obviously, South Carolina had their own redshirt freshman as well.
What I was going to say.
Go ahead, Alan.
No, I think we're all in agreement. That's the best we've seen Lenore Sellers look in his college career, like just as a group. I don't think it's even really a question.
Yeah, I mean, he had some truly insane Houdini moments on Saturday. I think there is some credit due to the way the offensive line played, especially in the run game, which we'll get into a little bit too. They protected him kind of all right, but there were several times where he was pretty much dead to rights, and he just completely pulled a rabbit out of a hat and was able to escape. I'm sure Mike Elko and company are preaching wrapping up and finishing the tackles this week. But 6'3", 250 turns out doesn't go down super easy. And him extending the plays and stuff was so huge on Saturday. What did you see, Alan?
You saw, or at least I thought I saw, the idea of what you wanted Lenore Sellers to be the whole time. Like, the whole time you were recruiting him, he had the flashes last year when he played. This idea that, okay, like you said, 6'3", 250, can move quickly, has a good arm, good decision maker. You kind of saw all of that sort of come together in the night. And, there was never even really a point where I thought, okay, you shouldn't have done that. That was a mistake. The ball never went in harm's way. I can think of one time where like I thought he was carrying the ball a little bit loose and he might have gotten away with that, but even then he tucked it to his other arm and got out of bounds. Yeah, that's the idea that a freshman quarterback is just going to get better the longer he plays, and there's going to be some growing pains, but he's healthy. He's played 4 games in a row, start to finish now, and it looks like it is kind of was my main takeaway.
Yeah, we were talking last week about how I think some people still forget how early in his career is because there was so much weight put on his shoulders before the season. And I agree. It sounds, I mean, you go back to last week too. I think these past 2 games, you've seen him really take a huge step forward, which is what we were hoping to see. And realizing that he doesn't have to make this giant play on every single play, right? He kind of took what the defense gave him. There were a ton of checkdowns to the running backs and tight ends, which I've been advocating for a few weeks now.
Scramble drill stuff too. I'm thinking of 2 different plays to Rocket where the pocket breaks down, he gets out of it. Rocket makes a good play himself to kind of get open and find some space, and Sellers hit him on the run. And one of those in the first drive of the game led to that you know what I'm talking about, like down A&M sideline.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Pauline, before we hopped on here, you were kind of saying that you thought this was the best offensive performance overall on the season.
I did say that because honestly, what I have noticed / the trend is the defensive players have been the ones scoring our points. So it is very refreshing to see like the offense actually work and do the job that they're supposed to do. But I wanted to touch on Lenoris because I do think that in the past 2 games, he has done a 180 from the beginning of the year. His ball handling skills are way better. I didn't really see any sort of, like you mentioned, Alan, like any sort of loose handling of the ball, which is really important. I remember Shane literally had touched on that a lot. The stat of 6'2", 6'3", 250 quarterback that kept going the entire game. So I would have to say he is a unicorn quarterback. Basically, just like I think he's gotten the kinks out, and now he is a very versatile player.
Yeah, it's really the lack of mistakes, I think, have played a huge role. And then we talked a little bit about this already, but both he and Raheem Sanders were able to get the rushing game going. Rocket had 20 carries for 144 yards, 2 touchdowns, a long of 52, which was a touchdown. Lenora Sellers had 15 attempts for 106 yards. Altogether, they combined for 286 rushing yards. And prior to this game, Texas A&M had been giving up about 100 yards a game. Just last week, they gave up 24 yards on 23 carries to LSU or something like that. Alan, what do you think accounted for just how successful South Carolina was running the ball against a very good Texas A&M defense in their own right?
I think there's so much to it. When you rush for 286 yards, it's never just one thing, but that's the best offensive line performance South Carolina's had. I don't know. You fill in the blank. Definitely since I've been here. I'm not counting like Furman or SC State or Akron or any of those types of opponents. I know there was a couple times Lenoris had to, like you said, the Houdini act, get out of pressure, scramble around. But here's the truth of it: 0 sacks, 0 pre-snap penalties, 0 holding penalties, 286 rushing yards. And I thought the most impressive thing of the night was you get the ball back with 5 minutes to go up 10 and you scored. Like you in a spot where your opponent knows you're going to run the ball and there's no secret about it, you still got enough push. You were blowing people off the line of scrimmage to open up holes. And I guess technically it was a pass, the short throw to Simon on the score. But you move bodies all night. Like that's something we haven't seen really all year. Like just, it's football's kind of the same as it was in 1870. It's blocking and tackling, and that was the best they blocked and tackled probably all year.
Yeah, we have to keep in mind that this was coming off of the bye week, and I do think that we saw a little bit of a different strategy in the run blocking. A more
pin and pull stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Shane talked about that today.
More pin and pull stuff. I saw more 2 tight end sets. And then, like we said, Lenora Sellers, when he was asked to throw the ball, which I also want to give some credit to Dowell Loggins for once the run game got going, he didn't become too predictable. There was still several first downs where he was setting up a play action pass or whatever. There was a really nice, the first first or second touchdown of the game. It was right off of a turnover on downs, I think, for A&M. He took a deep shot.
Yeah, the little leak by Simon where he kind of lines two tight ends in the play there, like you said. Simon lines up as the inline one, comes across, A&M defense loses him for a touchdown.
Yeah, exactly. And that was actually something that I noted in the box score as well, was even though Lenore Sellers was only 13 for 27, which ended up being about a 48% completion percentage, he had an average yards of completion at 18.8. So when they were connecting, they ended up going for big plays a lot of the time. And then defensively, which if we wanted to kind of transition to that a little bit, South Carolina started strong, had that early turnover on downs, had one again later too. Did have a little bit of a lull there in the middle. They mislined up on a 4th and 1 or 3rd and 1 that Amari Daniels broke through the line and scored on a 56-yard touchdown run, which came at a bad time for sure. But then they settled in, like we said. South Carolina scored 27 straight points. They shut out A&M in the second half. What did you feel about the defensive performance? I'll start with Pauline.
Kind of, you already touched on the one play that comes to mind of just, I can't decide if it's like our defense isn't as fast as their offense was, but that one play really stuck out in my mind of just like, we totally missed the ball on that one. So, and like I said before, the defense was, thank God they're not really anymore, but they were the scoring side of our team for a very long time. So it's refreshing to see the offense actually turn some plays and score some points.
Yeah, on the one that you're talking about, Tonka Hemingway actually got there in the backfield, but as soon as he missed, there was no one there to fill the gap.
I think it was Brian Thomas Jr., not to pick on him because I thought he played pretty well, but was in his gap with Tonka. There was no one in the B gap.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, they sold out to stop the run, and then you didn't have anyone on the second level when they missed, and that's going to happen on occasion. As far as the way that the defense played as a whole in the night, I mean, big shout out to Debo Williams.
Yep.
He was integral in both of those 4th and 1 stops. Yeah. And then you got to a point that I think you got in Texas A&M's head, because later in the game, there was another occasion where the analytics or whatever would have said to go for it on 4th and 1. And,
good point. Yep.
And yeah, Elko opted to punt it. And then they asked him on the broadcast about it, and he was like, well, we haven't been getting them, So I thought that was huge from an intimidation factor. And then we haven't talked about this a ton. We talked about it a lot in the preseason, Alan, but the hockey shifts, I thought, played a big role in the freshness of the defense late in that game. You did see the defensive pass rush, which has been so integral up to this point of the season, get pretty frustrated early in the game. But over time, I think you were just fresher in the fourth quarter and started to wind them down, really on both sides of the ball. But what else did you see on defense, Alan?
Yeah, first of all, I thought Dylan Stewart played way better than his stat line. Only one sack there, but he was in on, I feel like, every play. There were several times where I'm looking for a holding flag. Just guys can't block him, and you knew they wouldn't be able to for a 5-star who's playing like it. But start there. Debo Williams, you already brought him up, but probably had the two biggest plays of the game, in my opinion, defensively. TJ Sanders, too, I thought was really, really active. I know he had the big third down sack. I think it was A&M's second to last drive of the game. But I thought just in general, he played really well. And my whole thing is I'm really big on yards aren't points, that you can give it as many more yards as you want between the ones. As long as you don't give up points, it doesn't really matter. I thought you saw that on a few occasions in that game. The 4th and 1 stops, like you said, you can give up 9 yards on a series. That's fine. Just don't give up 10. And you saw that 2 different times. It led to 10 points with stops. We talked about red zone defense coming into the game, how good A&M was in the red zone. You made them kick 2 field goals in this game tonight. I thought that was big, or Saturday night, geez. I thought that was big. And it's just, you're going to give up yards. You're going to give up points sometimes when you're facing good offense. That's part of it. But I thought getting into the locker room, resetting at 2020, just realizing that they were the better team up front and playing like it. And like I said, I thought the situationally really good. 2 4th-and-1 stops, held them to 2 field goals on possible touchdown drives, and sometimes that's enough to win a football game. You make enough plays in the right spots.
I want to touch on your point, Alan, of just something about the confidence coming out in the second quarter or second half. I wrote the note down. The security in the team's identity was very evident. Like something about it, just the vibes on the field changed, and like they believed in themselves. I don't want to say like they never believed in themselves before, but like they had this sort of confidence that was like deep down, not just like a cocky second half, like, oh, we scored 14 points against them in the first quarter.
I also want to say too, speaking of going up, we're just bouncing all over the place now, but I thought the drive right before halftime was big. We've talked a lot about how much this team has struggled in 2-minute offense. It's been better the last month or so. You got the one in Alabama, the score, and then you got a field goal. But you go down for the first and only time in the game, and you immediately go down, get points, tie the game, reset the thing going into halftime. I thought that was a big drive and a good job by Lenoris in what was really like a 1-minute drill. I think A&M scored with like 1:08 left in the first half. They only had one timeout, still got down to field goal range. Whoever hits a kick ties the game. You go into halftime basically at 0-0.
Yeah, no, that was a really good moment. And to speak to Pauline's point, I do think that there is a sense of identity, not even forming with this team. That's like solidified at this point. I think that the games versus LSU and Alabama, they did not feel like those were fluky performances. And the last 2 weeks, I think that they're like, I mean, we talked about it before the Oklahoma game, but they are slamming the door shut, right? Like they're like, this is who we actually are. Let's finish these games. I mean, if you keep winning, then those LSU and Alabama games are going to sting a lot later, but we don't have to worry about that right now. Go ahead.
I do want to say that this was probably, like, to your point, one of the first times or first games that I would say this is not a fluke. This is like a good sort of baseline, which is crazy because it was Texas A&M, the undefeated team until us, or undefeated conference team until us. But yeah, like it's crazy that that's our base. Like I'm able to actually compare our performance and base it off of what was a top 10 team compared to LSU, Kentucky.
Yeah, well, even the last game that this happened in 2022 against Tennessee, my dad was saying, I was texting him like during the game or whatever. He was saying, oh, it reminds me of that. And I'm like, yeah, but I actually think that this is like a more solid team than that team was. That one did still feel kind of like you just like caught fire and you know, you were on some nights you just are on, and that's the way that night felt. This game against Texas A&M felt like South Carolina was the better team.
I thought that even when the game was tied at halftime, I was looking, man, how is this thing tied? Like South Carolina's played so much, not so much better, but solidly better than A&M in the first half. And you go in there almost disappointed the game's tied after the way they played in the first half. And then you come out in the second half and show that. Speaking of Tennessee in 22, that was a conversation today in media that last time you had a win like this, you followed it up with another one. Obviously, they went to Clemson the next week. Vanderbilt's not quite the same thing as Clemson, just in terms of the emotion of that game. But we're going to talk about that a little bit before we get out of here, and we're going to be back later in the week to preview that game in full. But this is a really good Vanderbilt team South Carolina is going to play. Probably the best one in like a decade, if we're being honest. Vandy's 6-3 right now. South Carolina's 5-3. Fringe top 25 matchup. I think Vandy was 24 on the AP poll, and South Carolina was 27 if you count like the others receiving votes. Yeah, what are your early thoughts? I guess we're 5 days out or 4 days out on South Carolina, Vandy next week.
I know that this doesn't actually matter, but I do wonder South Carolina not being ranked and Vandy being ranked. That's got to be a bulletin board thing, right? Like after the win that South Carolina just came off of, I actually put at the end of my rapid reaction, South Carolina likely to be ranked, but they weren't. So yeah, they're like 27th-ish right now. I like my initial reaction is Diego Pavia is very dangerous, but I think South Carolina is one of the faster defenses that they've faced this year, which is funny to say since they've faced Alabama, who's a traditionally very fast and good defense. I think it's arguable that South Carolina's got a better defense than Alabama does, though, right now.
I don't think it's arguable. I think they just do,
Yeah.
which unbelievable sentence to say, but
yeah. So I think Pavia is still going to be able to make some things happen, and it's on the road, which is always a little dicey. But yeah, the real question is, can you control your emotions after this win and keep your nose to the grindstone? And I think the fact that they are ranked kind of helps that a little bit, right? And the fact that Vanderbilt, like if this was sleepy Vanderbilt, I almost would be more afraid of it than the fact that this is one of the better seasons that Vandy's had in their entire history, you know.
I would say I agree with the keeping the emotions in check and just making sure you're not going into Vanderbilt with the same mentality that you would of maybe the team last year or in the past couple of years where they really have not shown like the type of skill that they're showing this year. I will say I was a doubter against the Gamecocks this weekend against Texas A&M. So, you know, I was wrong, but I feel like if we do let our emotions get the better of us, we are going to quickly see Vanderbilt take over the game. So the 24, like being ranked in the top 25, I definitely think is like a good reality check for our players and for our fans.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna.
I will say too, going off that, like Vanderbilt's. I promise you, and again, what a sentence. Vanderbilt's not going to be afraid of South Carolina. They lined up and ran the ball. They on Alabama. They lined up and played Texas down to a 3-point game that was still in doubt in the last minute. Like this is not. And I mean, I think it was Case and Henry said it today at media, but like, just throw away anything you've ever thought about Vanderbilt. This is just a solid SEC football team that's going to a bowl game. And I think South Carolina is going to have I think they're going to win the game. Just sitting here Tuesday, we'll see the rest of how I feel when we get back here Thursday or Friday. I think South Carolina is deservingly favored, even though it's a short favorite right now. It's favored by 3.5. But this is going to be a tough game, and if you don't play well, you absolutely can lose this game to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, no, if last week was the statement that this is a program on the rise, you have to win this game this coming week to complete that sentence or whatever. All right, one more thing before we move on from Texas A&M, because I love to talk about special teams. You know I do. I think that there is a special shout out just for how complete that game was altogether. Kai Kroger had 3 punts that he dropped within the 20, which had Texas A&M having to drive the entire field the whole night. Pretty big game for him. And then I thought Alex Herrera, a really nice bounce back game for him. We talked about that. Can he make a kick over 45 yards? Well, they didn't ask him to, but he did make one from 44 and 44. That one from 44 was right before the half, like you said, kind of helped carry the momentum into halftime, and South Carolina didn't lose the momentum from there. So I wanted to give my little shout out to special teams. I will give them one little ding, though, on the weird directional drop kick thing that they tried to do, and it very much didn't work. Hey, but that's a results thing, right? What maybe it would have dropped perfectly in there and they would have gotten an onside kick or something. I don't know what they were trying to do, but it did not work.
That's one of those things, like you said, it's a results thing. We're talking about that a lot more if you lose or if it's a 1-score game late. You win by 24, it's kind of a funny footnote and we can forget about it.
Right.
I do want to say I have my like MVPs of the game I wrote down, and Alex Herrera was one. I think just for the fact that he was it the farthest he's kicked so far this season?
I think.
Yeah.
I think his long for the year was 46, so close.
Yeah. But being hitting the field for the first time as a 6th year after one of the number one kickers in the country left, definitely a lot of pressure. Hence, kind of like the performance at LSU. So kudos, like Caleb said. I don't know, maybe we can touch on it a different time, but like Alex versus Kai and how that is going. I obviously know they're different jobs, but Kai Kroger has, his performance hasn't been what I feel like I've typically seen him at, especially like the out of bounds I don't know if it was a kick return, but yeah, he seems to be almost missing the mark a little bit, and I don't know why.
Yeah, Herrera's typically in that role. I mean, they were obviously trying some sort of trick thing. Actually, that's the only times that I would say that Kai maybe has been a little down this year is in the 2 trick plays that he's failed on this year. But his punting has actually been much better, I think, than last year. I think he had a little bit of a junior slump, whatever, last year. But he's gonna get paid on Sundays after the way that he's been punting this year so far.
Oh, absolutely.
And then Herrera, I think as long as they don't push him past his limitations, which we've talked about a little bit, then he's a really good kicker. And I think if you're around that 50-yard mark, you probably just try to go for it. That's probably the best way to go. Let's talk a little bit about basketball. Both teams opened up their season yesterday. Just like a couple sentences about each, but let's start with the bad news. The men lost their season opener to North Florida. They led most of the game and then sort of let it get away from them at the end. Pretty up and down performance. They started really slow on offense and then hit one of those lulls at the worst possible time, which we saw at several points in losses last year. Colin Murray Boyles led the team with 17 points. Jamari Thomas also had 12 points. You saw a couple of bench threes from Studi, from Jordan Butler. But overall, I thought the offense struggled a bit. And the really concerning thing, I think, based on what's been the bread and butter the last couple of years, is the defense could not hold down North Florida, especially from 3. North Florida hit 10 of 29 threes. I mean, they were chucking it, but that eventually caught up to you down the stretch. Did you watch any of that one, Alan?
I watched the last 8 or 9 minutes once it was close. I think it just kind of goes to what I said after the exhibition game, that you just don't have a lot of shot creators right now, guys who can just put the ball on the deck and get to the rim. And when you do that, your margin for error is smaller and you got to defend better than they did. I think it's going to take some time to figure out who can actually make their own shot on this team.
I definitely think the exhibition game, in my personal opinion, kind of worried me a little bit, even though they did pull out a win. Like, it was not the same performance that Lamont had last year, which, I mean, it's a little bit early, but
this is a much younger team for sure. It's going to be a growing process, but you better grow quick if you're going to be dropping games, quad 4 games at home.
Yeah.
Like the schedule was built for you to ramp up, and you fell before you got onto the ramp.
Yeah.
Which is a concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, Alan, you were in Vegas last night. The women win 68-62 against a pretty good Michigan team.
Mm-hmm.
Similar notes, I guess, though, that this is a team that is trying to figure out its footing after last year and losing some contributors last year. Specifically, you don't have a Cardoso on the inside as a defensive enforcer or as someone that you can just kind of throw it up to in a pinch. It did seem like Chloe Kitts kind of played that role at times, at least offensively last night. But what do you think about where they're at, and how can we judge this Michigan team? Like, how good of a win that was last night?
Yeah, I think that's the main. You hit it right there. This is going to take some time to figure out without Cardoso. They were taught that's kind of there. I called it easy button offense for 3 years, that you could just throw the ball to 6'7" and it was going to work. I think there's pieces there in the post. I think you can piece it together. Players are going to develop. You're also not going to shoot 19% from 3 all year. Like, that was a very uncharacteristically bad shooting night last night. That's going to even out over the year. But yeah, that's definitely the biggest question right now. I think it's a pretty good Michigan team. They made a tournament last year, brought in a 5-star true freshman who scored 27 in her debut last night. So it's tough competition. It's not the toughest they're going to see. I wouldn't panic long term, but I'm going to reiterate what I said last week. This team's going to lose a game or two this year, and you guys just need to be okay with that. I know it hasn't happened in the regular season in a little bit, and people don't know how to handle it maybe, but it might happen Sunday, honestly. You have the Final Four rematch with NC State. We'll see what happens in that game, but long-term panic, no. Questions, yes. And I think that was still a pretty good Michigan team that they beat on a neutral court. So,
yeah, everyone marked down the name Silas Swords, that freshman from Michigan. Yeah, that is a good name. But yeah, she led them in points and rebounds in her first game as a true freshman. So maybe going to make some waves in the Big Ten over there. Pauline, did you have any notes on women's basketball before we get out of here?
Yeah, I do agree that Cardoso was a comfort. I definitely think it was a luxury to have a 6'7" girl on our team. That's not very typical. So it will be interesting to see how Chloe Kitts, if she will fill that role, what the players will develop into. I was kind of thinking, we're not going back to football, but I kind of thought about, that's kind of like how Zach Pickens and Jordan Birch, they're big people. They're big, we had the people to block. We had the people to, but now there's no Cardoso. So we shall see. I agree with Alan on the fact that the fans just need to get over it and realize that this is a new team and there are going to be some kinks that need to be worked out.
Yeah, it's kind of like telling the mid-20 whatever, really the last 15 years Alabama fans to get over when they lose a game or two, right? That's how
I think it's different in football though, where 1 or 2 losses can be your season.
Sure.
They're playing 30 games. They're not going 30-0 in the regular season. I don't think that's happening again. And I also don't think it's a big deal as long as they're playing their best basketball at the end of those 30. You don't want to peak in November. That was another takeaway just from talking to people there last night.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, there's still plenty of room to grow, and maybe a couple losses is part of that growth. We will be back here later in the week to preview Vanderbilt fully. But if you're missing content in the meantime, go over to GamecockScoop.com. We have tons of articles previewing things, wrapping up things from Texas A&M. I know Alan's Behind the Box Score was last night. Really good article. We got some quotes from Josh Smith about his commitment earlier today. And yeah, I think maybe there's some other things going on tonight that you'll be a little distracted with. So,
College football playoff rankings, 8 minutes.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant.
Nothing else is happening tonight.
In the meantime, this has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast. Everyone stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you soon.